This is week 201 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and our first episode of 2026. So as we enter this new year, which happens to be an Olympic year at that, and the fourth anniversary of the full-scale invasion is looming less than 2 months away, cracks are beginning to show in the world's resolve when it comes to Russia's isolation from international sports competitions. So this week, we're going to be taking a look at what federations and institutions are walking back their stances against Russia's invasion, where we can expect to see the most drama this year, and why it matters more than ever that these bans are upheld. So to start, let's recap the basic facts. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, major international sport and culture institutions quickly moved to ban Russian participation out of solidarity with Ukraine. The International Olympic Committee, or the IOC, moved first, framing its decision as a means of safeguarding the integrity and safety of sport, which became the template language for hundreds of decisions to follow. The rulings were not uniform in their conditions. Some banned all Russian participants outright, as well as Belarusian athletes for their country's enabling of Russia. Some federations allowed Russia and Belarus to participate as neutral athletes, while others banned team events but not individuals, and still others allowed for participation in under-18 leagues only. But they all served to signal that Russia's aggression carried consequences beyond diplomacy and sanctions lists. Such isolation would bruise the ego of any country, but especially Russia, where successful performances in international sports events serve as a rare source of national pride, and where the president desperately wants to believe that he's a pro-hockey player. This widespread ban means that a Russian delegation hasn't appeared in the last 3 Eurovisions or Cannes Film Festivals, and they missed the last Olympic Games and FIFA World Championship, just to name a few. Now, this move wasn't entirely unprecedented in sports when it comes to Russia. The years prior to the full-scale invasion were riddled with accusations of doping, positive tests for banned substances, and mandates that Russian athletes compete under neutral flags as a consequence for doping scandals, including at the 2018 Winter Olympics. Adding this here is just to note that there was already a history of litigating the consequences of individual Russians' participation in sports due to the unethical behavior of their home federations. The decision to ban Russia from most major international competitions in 2022 out of solidarity with Ukraine wasn't without controversy. Critics argued that it was wrong to punish individuals for the actions of their governments, and argued that further isolating Russia from the wider world would only worsen the conflict. Following the outbreak of war between Israel and Hamas in 2023, many also claimed that it was hypocritical that Russia should be banned from international events, but not Israel, a critique that few institutions have given a straightforward response to. As a side note, at least 4 countries, including Ireland, Spain, the Netherlands, and Slovenia, will be boycotting this year's Eurovision Song Contest after calling unsuccessfully for Israel to be banned. And I'm adding this to illustrate just how much international competitions and participation in them is a political matter, and an ongoing and iterative one, both in the case of Russia and Ukraine, and beyond. So, circling back, all of that is to say, by 2023, it was more common for Russia to be banned from an international competition than allowed to participate, and the messaging was consistent. Participation in international cultural life is conditional. The invasion crossed a line, and Russia couldn't come back until it stopped invading Ukraine. However, almost 4 years later, that unified front is visibly fraying. Russia is still very much invading Ukraine, and it looks like they have a shot at once again invading podiums worldwide at the same time. The most consequential shift has come through the IOC's evolving position. From the early days of their blanket ban, the IOC began endorsing a pathway for individual Russian and Belarusian athletes to compete under neutral status, provided they met specific, albeit not always objective, criteria. Now, these criteria include the athlete having no history of public support for the war and no affiliation with military or security agencies. As of the 2026 Winter Olympics in Milan, we'll be seeing these so-called neutral athletes back in action. Now, I say so-called because of the nature of judging athletes' eligibility as non-political actors. Now, in Russia, many, if not most, athletes train at clubs sponsored by the state, teams which themselves have deep historical ties to the military. Likewise, there's no clear delineation between an athlete's performance in competition, their media persona, and their social media presence. Many times, a federation claims to condemn any and all outward support of Russia's war by athletes, but then isn't quite sure how to enforce those consequences when one of their athletes posts a pro-war meme out of the blue without a history of other statements, or poses for photos with family members in the military with a caption about wanting victory to come soon. Now, it's easy to suspect that these things signal sympathy for the war on the part of the athlete, but international bodies like the IOC aren't going to feel comfortable enforcing individual bans over them. And the end result is that there's a growing number of actively competing Russian athletes who represent state-sponsored clubs and have given more than one indication that they do support the invasion. A dossier compiled by Molfar Intelligence Institute found at least 56 athletes, including many members of the Russian bobsled and skeleton teams, that had at least some kind of documented engagement with pro-war materials. In other cases, athletes like gymnast Angelina Melnikova were granted neutral status after going so far as to run for local government under Putin's ruling party. Winter sports have followed the IOC's neutral athlete convention to an uneven effect. Several sports, including cross-country skiing and figure skating, have confirmed Russian athletes' participation in the upcoming Olympics, even as scrutiny over past doping cases remains intense. The return is supposed to be technical rather than celebratory. No flags, no anthems, and no team events. But it's still going to be broadcast at home as an enormous win for Russia, which didn't have to end its imperial war to regain acceptance on the world stage. As more and more events feature Russian athletes competing under neutral flags, from tennis players to gymnasts, it becomes increasingly clear that the pretense of neutrality is more often than not lost in the execution. Commentators refer to players as Russians, the audience applauds their return, and Russian officials put out congratulatory statements afterwards. Now, some sports have skipped the premise of neutrality entirely. In 2025, chess's largest governing body, which kept Russians at the highest levels of leadership the entire time anyway, allowed Russian and Belarusian teams and officials back into many aspects of international chess. Individual players had already been competing as neutrals, so the change marked a return to essentially the pre-full-scale status quo. Wrestling has taken a hybrid approach. United World Wrestling has permitted Russian and Belarusian wrestlers to compete under its own flag rather than a national or neutral banner, which doesn't really do much other than allow Russia a loophole to participate in ranking events and Olympic qualifiers. If earlier I said that by 2023 it was more common that Russia would be banned from a competition than not, by early 2026 we're facing a quickly creeping reversal. Whether by covert loophole or outright reinstatement, it's becoming more common for Russia to be invited to the table than excluded from it. There are many things in the Kyiv independence wishes for 2026. An end to the war, reopened airports, and less bad news to write about. But that's not the world we live in, though, and we're prepared accordingly to lock in through thick and thin to bring you the most accurate, up-to-date information about what's happening on the ground in Ukraine through another year of Russia's brutal invasion. If you'd like to join our community of more than 25,000 members, there will be a link to our membership page in the description below. Thank you also to everyone who gives directly via YouTube. Your donations go directly toward supporting shows like this. The common arguments against banning whole countries from international events often comes down to two key points. Sports and culture should be separate from politics, and individuals can't be held responsible for what their governments do, right? Bans on Russian and Belarusian participants after 2022 came from the belief that a country that attacks another country unprompted is no longer eligible to host or represent itself, and that it causes more harm to the victim to expose them to the attacker than it does to the attacker to be banned. The gradual rollback of bans has been driven by equally formal arguments of ethics and justice, the rights of individual athletes, the absence of explicit legal mandates to exclude, and the practical difficulties of maintaining indefinite suspensions. These are real considerations, and they explain why neutral status has become the default compromise, albeit a flawed one. Yet the ethical question has not changed. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine is ongoing. The conditions that prompted the original bans have not been resolved. Readmitting athletes and institutions under neutral labels does not alter that context. It merely reframes participation as something unrelated, implying grayness in a matter previously agreed to be black and white. So what do I want you to take from this video? That it matters when a Russian team is allowed back into a sport. It matters when a famous film festival flies a Russian flag outside its screenings. It matters when someone in a decision-making role has a stronger opinion about the Olympics than about the largest land war in Europe in a century. So I look forward to covering these stories for you as they evolve this year, and to debate these questions of ethics, fairness, and justice that they bring up. We'd also like to hear from you. What do you think of Russia and Belarus being allowed back into sports? What do you think their correct answer is? And what would you like to see happen this year? We'll be back next Sunday with our normal program, and we're excited to be kicking off another year of weekly updates. That's all for this week. If you appreciated this video, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's truly thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.